Hello and welcome to Deeper, the podcast where we have honest conversations with fascinating people who've lived amazing lives and the companion piece to our YouTube series Deep. We want to give you a deeper window into the lives and experiences of our guests, and if you enjoy this video, please do consider subscribing because there'll be a new one every week. I'm Ben Powell-Jones, and today we are joined by Boudicca Rising. Boudicca, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. I've been really looking forward to talking to you about this because it's something that captivated my imagination since I first saw people discussing it. But for anyone who doesn't know who you are or what you do, could you give us a brief explanation of what you're known for?
So my name's Boudicca. I co-run a team of 6 animal abuse investigators, and we are, what's the best way to describe us? We investigate what was known as the Croydon Cat Killer or the UK Animal Killer or the M25 Animal Killer. And we have that investigation, and we occasionally get involved in other animal abuse investigations as well.
Let's jump straight into your story with this case.
Yeah.
How did you first come into contact with the story around what became known as the Croydon Cat Killer?
Yeah, my ex-partner and I ran a rescue in South Norwich, and we we saw on Facebook that there was a vet posted on Facebook to say, please keep your cats indoors at night because we've had 4 cats brought into us mutilated. I thought it was a bit of not a hoax, but I just thought it was a bit both alarming, and also I didn't think that was going on. So I kind of said, well, we better have a look and have a chat to them. And he did. He rang the vets, and the vet said, no, we absolutely have had these animals brought into us, 4 of them, and they've all been mutilated. So we rang our vets, and our vet said, yes, we've had one as well. And because we were homing animals in the area, what we didn't want to be doing is continuing to place animals in homes in that area. And we went out and we put something on Facebook ourselves. We went down to the area and put leaflets out on a Saturday afternoon with some volunteers. And we came home with, I think it was 18 individual incidents. Some of it was kind of third hand. So we spent the next week or so trying to get hold of the owners or witnesses or vets. And we had 15 that we were able to verify. We took those to Croydon Police. And Croydon Police said, oh, we didn't know this was going on. And I said, well, it is. And they've all been reported to you because here's all the incident numbers. And they went, oh, and I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And they said, well, we can't really do anything about it because it's all happened. So I said, okay. I said, so what happens now? They said, okay, when you get another one, bring us the body. And I said, okay, what are you going to do with the body? Because you don't have a budget for animal crime. The RSPCA do that. And they went, oh. And we were tired underwhelmed. And we kind of went, well, so it's down to us then. And the police officer, very, very polite, nice police officer, just kind of went, yeah. So that's kind of how it started. So we then put an appeal out on Facebook for anybody else who'd had this happen to them to contact us. And we then got, in fairly quick succession, 3 or 4 more. Our vet had, because he had forensic experience, offered to basically do the post-mortems. And he came to the conclusion that it was a human being doing it. And then we got a call from a police officer in, I think it was Gypsy Hill, who had also had some. And he said, would you work with us? And I said, yeah, absolutely. But it wasn't, that was kind of the September, October 2015. I think it was January time, 2016, that the Met called us, DC Andy Collins, and he said, look, could you come in and chat to us? So we did. And to cut a very long story short, for the next 2 years, the RSPCA, us and police worked together on the investigation. And there were plus sides and downsides to that. But what they wanted us to do was remain kind of the contact, because both the RSPCA and police couldn't respond quickly enough. So we kind of both had to stay as the contact, and also the people who went out to scenes the most. And then what we would do is if we went out to dead animal and we thought it was related, we'd then call the police and they'd arrange for scenes of crime officers to attend. And we did that until I think it was about September 2019, when the police closed the case, saying it was road traffic accidents and foxes, we made a decision to continue based on the fact that foxes don't return body parts up to 6 months later undecomposed, and they don't nail body parts of cats to doors either. So there was quite a lot that would indicate that it wasn't down to foxes. And then in June, July 2019, the Snarl team split, and Rob and I and one other team member started Slay. And what we wanted to do was concentrate on all the aspects of the investigation that the police, we knew that by then, that the police hadn't done, like looking at suspects, proper geoprofiling. The data was in, I think, 7 or 8 different Word documents and spreadsheets and all sorts. So we spent the next year and a half putting that all back together again to give us kind of a cohesive look of what was going on. Because it was just, at one point the RSPCA were keeping records. We were at one point the police said not to because they were, but then wouldn't release their stuff back to us. So it was a real muddle of information. And that took about a year and a half to do. I kind of went through all the emails, set the spreadsheet up, and then one of my team members went in with all the other bits and started adding it. But it took us ages and ages because I then had to go back and verify it all.
I'd like to go back a little bit there. So for anyone that isn't aware of the case, so you said that you had spoken to the police in Gypsy Hill. Yeah. And at that point in time, I was living in Crystal Palace, which was just up from Gypsy Hill.
Oh, right, okay.
And I actually remember seeing, I think or someone from your organisation's post on Facebook about cats. Have you had any information? Has anything happened to your cats, or do you know anything? And I own 2 cats, or I did then.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh, this is really strange. It's a strange post. And people had started to write below, my cat's gone missing, or my neighbour's cat's gone missing, or this. And I remember reading down it and thinking, this feels really strange. Like I thought it was a strange initial post, and I imagined people would say, what's this? Yeah. But there was a lot of people commenting.
Going, oh, hang on, that's, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So you went from going out and flyering on a weekend, and then coming back with, you said, 15 accounts of cats being injured. But I know the details are a bit more gruesome than cats just disappearing. And can you go into that a little bit? As in, what was the point that you thought, okay, this is not just cats being hit by cars. What was happening to the cats?
One of the difficulties was that there was quite a mix of injuries. So in the majority of the cats were being decapitated and having their tails removed. But the first official victim actually was slit down the middle, and his intestines were removed and placed next to him. And that was another reason why we weren't sure initially what we were dealing with, because equally a cat can get run over and the force of the vehicle can cause really strange injuries that look like they could be deliberate but actually aren't. They're accidental, which is why we pulled our vet in very, very early, because what we didn't want to be doing is making a big fuss about nothing. But yeah, in the main it was decapitations and tail removals.
So the cats were being found headless, or were the heads present at the scene?
Both. So in most cases, the heads were not present at all. Heads and tails were missing, and in most cases, both the heads and tails were missing. But in some cases, it was just tails and just heads. In some cases, the body was missing, and the heads were placed back, usually on the doorstep.
On the doorstep of the owners?
Yeah, or the neighbours. Usually, where the cat spent the most of its time was where the cat was placed back.
So, were people immediately saying this? Were people saying the cat went missing and then the heads reappeared later? Or were people coming home to find the heads or the tails?
It was a mixture. People were going, well, my cat's missing and we don't know what's happened to him. There was one horrible case where a cat was missing for a week, belonged to a schoolgirl living in Alderscombe. She was 12 or 13. And she came home and found the cat's tail across her path in front of the front door, but just the tail, nothing else. So again, a mixture. There wasn't one definite thing that was continuing to go on.
So when it's a mixture of things and not one thing that's constant,
yeah,
how do you come to the conclusion that it's somebody doing it rather than a mix of freakish circumstances?
Yeah, because freaky circumstances can only happen a couple of times. Freaky circumstances are freaky because they don't commonplace. But essentially, we went off the back of our vet's recommendations, and then the RSPCA brought in a vet who also believed they were human related. And we then, once the second lot of postmortems were done, we put a checklist together of things. I mean, there were two reasons for this. Number one, we were getting called out to every dead animal in the southeast, so we had to have a way of sifting through that. So when we got a phone call, being able to go, okay, is this missing? Is that missing? Where was the body found? Blah 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 blah. Does it look wet, etc., etc. Because some of the bodies are actually washed.
Washed?
So yeah. Some of them have been washed, and they're absolutely soaking, but it hasn't rained. And we think that's forensic related, but we kind of had this checklist that we took from all the information. It was about 9 months, a year in, so that we could work out what was likely to be related and what wasn't. And within that, we had signature injuries. When I say signature injuries, there were particular things he does to the cats that we were noticing over and over and over. Not every time, and it was a collection of them. It wasn't just the one thing.
Can you tell us what they were?
No, I can't. We've never released those.
Okay.
But they were things that could only happen with a human involved. It couldn't happen with an animal involved or with a vehicle involved.
Okay. So there were kind of, signature injuries that you were looking for to rule out whether when you got a call, you could say, okay, that's not the person we're looking for, or that's not, okay.
In most road traffic accidents, the paw pads and the claws are abraded because cats have an instinctive reaction when they're hit by anything. Their claws will come out to steady them, and usually you can see that on cats that have been run over. It doesn't happen all the time, but if you see that, you can generally say, okay, that's traffic related.
Interesting. And did you know this yourself, or were you finding this out from the vet that you were speaking? Yeah, how were you getting this information?
The vets, yeah.
See,
we learned an awful lot from the postmortems that were carried out initially by our vet, the forensic pathologists who did the next set of postmortems, and also vets that were examining these bodies.
Okay, so from the point in time that you started looking into it and sort of donating your time to it and going to see these events, to the point in time that you said the police called you and said, can you come in for a chat? How many cats would you say you'd...
There were about 20.
20 that you were
20
saying?
20 new ones. So between October 2015 and January 2016, it was probably, it was 15 or 20.
15 or 20 that you were confident had been killed by the same person?
Vets were confident they'd been killed by a human. We're still not entirely sure whether we're dealing with one. In fact, we know that in some instances we haven't been dealing with one killer. We've been dealing with several. But it's just that those people have been... So David Ewu and Brendan Geoghegan were both killing animals at the same time. Brendan Geoghegan was responsible for the Northampton cluster, and David Ewu was responsible for the Norwich cluster. But David Ewu also travelled around the country, and we think he's responsible for some of ours. So there's no simple answers with this. But we still rely on vets to tell us whether they're killed by a human or not. As much as I've seen dead bodies, I wouldn't presume to make that decision. That's got to be down to a vet. I can say, it looks similar, but in terms of telling you whether it's human related or not, that's a vet that's got to be able to do that.
It makes sense. So when the police called you in for the chat, you said earlier that when you'd initially spoken to the police, it was quite underwhelming, their response, and they said, well, we can't do anything. It happened in the past. And I think I read as well when I was reading one of the articles about this that killing cats isn't actually a crime. I think. Did I?
It is. It's a crime. Well, animal cruelty is a crime, but the way that our laws are written, that you effectively get a conviction if it's the owner who does it. If somebody else does it, you kind of have to go into quite a protracted process around proving it was cruel, that the animal suffered. So if you just kill a cat, it's not, horrible as it sounds, it's not illegal. Which means that and it's why David Ewu and Brendan Geegan and Stephen Bouquet were all charged with criminal damage rather than cruelty, even though there was a case for charging Stephen Bouquet with cruelty because what he was doing was absolutely cruel. There's no doubt about it. You've got a realistic chance of an effective prosecution for criminal damage than you do for cruelty.
Wow. So the criminal damage is because there is an owner of the cat that you've killed. God.
For cats that aren't owned, you can't do a criminal damage charge.
So do you think that's why they might choose cats over dogs or something like that, because there is less?
No, I can't. I'm not sure why he chooses mainly cats. He doesn't just choose cats. There have been some dogs, foxes and rabbits. But in the main, I don't know. It's very hard to try and get into the brain of somebody who does this.
Yes, well, thank God.
Yeah.
So you went to the police. They were not very helpful, and then eventually they called you back in and said, "Can you come and speak to us?" After a very large amount of more cats had been killed. What do you think was it that pushed them into action at that point?
I don't honestly know. I think someone had a look at it. It's much like the neighbourhood police we went to see had no idea it was going on because nobody was looking at the intel reports. I think once somebody looked at the intel reports and went, "Oh, hang on a second," and perhaps, I don't know, maybe they had to look at other areas as well. I'm not entirely sure what triggered that decision.
And then when you did go in, how did that meeting go?
It was really good. Andy Collins was an excellent police officer. He was brilliant. He knew the owners' names. He knew the cats' names. He treated us with a great deal of respect. We were a bit like, but we thought he was excellent, and we retained that view.
Mm. So Andy Collins, is that correct?
Andy Collins, yeah.
So was he the officer that was sort of put across this case?
Yeah. He was in charge of the. He was a serious crimes unit in Croydon. Okay. So they didn't just deal with this case; they dealt with all serial and serious crime.
What came from that initial meeting with police? What were the actions after that? Did the police then get involved?
The actions were to get the RSPCA involved, and to keep basically being the main contact, because we had the Facebook page going on and because we had. There was a fair bit of press by that point, so they wanted us to stay kind of the main people who would take the calls. That changed over time. So what? Once the RSPCA were involved, the RSPCA said, "Oh no, the calls have got to come through to us." But then the helpline wasn't set up properly and wasn't briefed properly, so it was like we lost calls. So it ended up back in our court, and then it was basically call Snarl and call 101 as well, so that both the police and we were notified. There was quite a lot of the first 6 months. It was quite difficult because the RSPCA were going, "Well, it's got to be us in charge," and we were like, "Well, okay," and the police were going, "Well, it's got to be us in charge." We were like, "Oh, well, whatever, but please just get out to these bodies." And now that the police or the RSPCA had the manpower, in truth.
Mm. So for anyone listening that doesn't know, so RSPCA stands for the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. That's kind of a government body, is that correct? Or is it a charity?
It's a charity.
It's a charity, okay. And you would think that them being involved would be incredibly helpful to you, but it doesn't sound like it was particularly.
We had a Inspector Mike Butcher, who was their kind of representative, and he was excellent. He was absolutely on the ball. But in terms of the response, they weren't set up. They're still not set up to go out to dead animals. They're set up to try and save lives. And you can't turn a big organisation like that and kind of steer it in a different direction. It's like, try to steer the Titanic away from the iceberg. So it was difficult for them. I wouldn't criticise them by saying that they were useless. It's just that's not what they were set up for, and it's not what the police were set up for either.
Do you think, because we'll get into this a bit more later, but one of the big things around this case has always been if it's a person or an animal. Yeah. And it still is. When people talk about it, I see still on message boards a raging debate if it's brought up in the local area. Do you think the police and the RSPCA from the beginning believed it was a human? Because what occurs...
Yes, they did.
They did?
Yeah, they absolutely did.
So what occurs to me is I'm surprised there wasn't more nervousness around it. If there was a human going out and chopping the heads off animals with alarming frequency, why were they not taking it more seriously?
They did. They did. But what they couldn't do is they couldn't spare police officers to go running off to a dead cat. And this, again, is the issue, is that, once there's a bit of publicity, the police got called about every single dead cat in the same way as we did. And it did make it very difficult, because although we had the checklist and we could run through it and go, okay, that sounds more like an RTA, take the cat to a vet, please, the police 101 line, again, isn't set up for that sort of stuff. So they couldn't go through a checklist. And, there's hundreds of people who work on 101 and 909 lines. And the briefing never properly got through, I think. So it is difficult. I mean, I'd love to criticise the police, especially after they closed the case. But I don't think they had a lot of options.
Resource.
Money,
yeah.
What they should have done is said, look, we're not set up to solve this, and we're going to hand over to RSPCA and Snarl or whatever. But they didn't. They actually behaved quite badly. It caused us no end of issues, and to a degree still does. But what we didn't want to do when we started slaying is kind of have constant conversations about, is it foxes or is it people? We know it's people, and our job is to go and sort it. Our job isn't to kind of sit on social media and have arguments with people.
Yeah.
Because I did all that. I'm not going to sit here and go, I've got to convince you that, that this is a real problem, because I've already said all that.
So just for anyone watching, just to make it clear. So initially you were part of a group called SNARL, which was South Norwood Animal Rescue and Liberation Front.
No.
You say it. Well, I don't know why I'm trying to say it.
South Norwood, God, listen to me. South Norwood Animal Rescue and Liberty.
There we go. Oh yes, SNARL, yeah.
Yeah.
And at that point, so we'll come on to Slane when we get there in the story, but at that point, SNARL, was that formed because of this, or did that already exist?
No, we formed it. So I've been doing animal rescue for years and years, and I got to the point where I couldn't sort of rehome as the need grew. I couldn't rehome as easily, because I'd rehome to family, friends, etc. And we knew that we had to kind of have a formal rescue. So we did. We set up on Facebook a year before all this kicked off. Yeah.
And I remember, because I was on Facebook, I was on the Crystal Palace local Facebook page.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember, like you say, on the social media, people going back and forth about this. But the police launched a task force eventually, didn't they? Is it Takahi? Is that
Takahi,
yeah. Because when I read that, I was like, oh my God, this has got serious. But when we say task force, was that a group of policemen dedicated to this, or what was the reality of that?
It was mostly Andy Collin.
Right.
And he had 2 officers that he was able to dedicate to this. I think eventually when it came out, it was 2 part-time officers for 2 years, plus Andy. Who was obviously dealing with all of the crime, all the serious crime in Croydon, not just the cat killer.
I mean, they were obviously taking it seriously, though. That's 3 police officers assigned to this case. So, what did investigation look like? How were you and them and the RSPCA? How were you trying to catch the killer or killers, or was it more responsive to what was happening?
No, it was. We were quite clear. We remained the point of contact for people. So people would ring us if their cat was injured or hurt or killed. The RSPCA also took a number of those calls. The police did the investigation. We did some investigation in terms of the scene, taking witness statements and bits and pieces, and finding out when the cat was last seen and when all of that sort of stuff. But the actual nitty-gritty investigation was allegedly being done with the police.
Allegedly.
Yeah, well, this is what came out later, and kind of why Slane started, because we discovered that the investigation they'd done, certainly in the last year, when they took Andy Collin off the case, early 2018. So when they were in their review period, we knew they weren't investigating properly, because we got hardly any feedback, and we'd pass information on, and it would just be like, but we found out exactly how little had gone on. which is why we formed Slane to go through all of that again and go through all the suspects again. Because I think at one point, if a suspect was called into the police, if he didn't have a criminal record, it was binned.
I do
which
remember,
is frustrating.
Yes, I can imagine it is. Yeah, I do remember at one point, again on the Crystal Palace local, I do remember at one point there was like a description circulated of the person. Yeah. So, were there ever any leads? Was there ever anyone caught on CCTV or?
It was a mixture of things. So, although the police didn't want us patrolling, a patrol team was set up in Caterham. And where there'd been a number of incidents, and the incidents in Caterham were along three kind of roads that were interconnected. Like the local neighbourhood was like, we need to set up a patrol team, like a neighbourhood watch. And they did, and we helped them do that. And they were really, really good. They went out every night, they were, cruising about. And there was one night where they'd seen a guy kind of ducking in amongst cars and stuff. Because they were all vehicle-based, they didn't get out their car. But they kind of followed him, and he just disappeared down an alleyway, and they'd just gone. And they all worked and stuff. So sort of by 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, they were all asleep. Well, the cat was killed that night in that road. At which point they were like, but equally the lights went out in Caterham at midnight. It might have been 11 o'clock actually. But so it was pitch black dark, and they couldn't really see what he looked like. But they kind of got an idea. So I said, okay, got it into the police, etc., etc. And then a couple of residents saw a bloke of the same description. In one of them, he was making like noises and trying to get a cat's attention. Another one, he was doing something else odd. And he was literally, kind of weaving down the road, ducking and diving. So that was called into the police. And then I think 2 or 3 nights later, he was spotted again, and this time somebody actually chased him. I think with a garden fork, but they chased him down the road. Unfortunately, the police got there just too late. They came out with dogs just too late, and he again went down an alleyway and just disappeared. So from all those descriptions, there was kind of a generic description, and then I was. What was I doing? Oh, I was at the Warren on the Saturday, because they wanted me to do a briefing for local Bromley police about the case. But just before then, we were called to it wasn't decapitated. It was a cat that was mutilated in Orpington. And it was an odd case because the paws had been wrapped with something. And it was slightly different to what we'd been seeing, but not outside of the range. We had to wait for the police and forensics, etc. Went to this meeting, did the talk, came out. We had the dog with us. I think we went to the park to give the dog a walk and get some water and stuff. And my phone rang, and a woman said, "Oh, it sounds a bit weird, but it was about 4 o'clock the previous afternoon. She'd found this guy trying to coax her cats." And she said, "What the hell are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, no, I've lost my cat." And she said, "What did the cat look like?" And the woman said, the guy said, it was a silver tabby with white paws, male cat. And she said, "Well, there's no silver tabby with white paws here. Are you local?" And he said, Yeah, I live in number 15. And she knew who lived in number 15, so she knew he was lying. Anyway, she just said, "Look, can you please stop feeding my cats and go away?" And he did. But she thought about it, and the more she thought about it, the more she thought there's something really odd about him. And she actually got her husband to jump in the car with her, and they did a kind of a search to see if he was still around. And he wasn't, but it bugged her. So the next day she got online and had a look and discovered what was going on, and rang us. And it was quite chilling because the cat that we'd just been to was a silver tabby male with white paws. So that description was taken quite seriously, and it matched the Caterham description.
Wow.
And that's how that was circulated.
And how far apart were those two places?
Well, Caterham and Orpington, I'm terrible with geography, but Caterham's like the outer edge of Croydon, and Orpington's the outer edge of Bromley, so they're quite far apart.
Okay.
But they were different nights. Yeah. So that Caterham, I think, was the Wednesday, Thursday, and this was the Friday into the Saturday.
So did you ever find anyone that matched that description?
It was quite a generic description. And there's quite a few suspects that fall into that category. At one time, we had 60-odd suspects.
And how were you finding suspects? How were you designating?
Usually they're called into us. So people would ring up and say, look, I think so-and-so's the Croydon Cat Killer. 90% of those cases were ex-partners trying to get their exes into trouble. And in one spectacular case was a Facebook friend of mine who'd dated a guy, had a one-night stand with him, got dumped, and tried to get him into trouble, which really pissed me off. She rang me at midnight. I was just about to go to bed. I can't tell you how mad life was. And she gave this long, involved story. And I said, well, what makes you think he's the Croydon Cat Killer? Well, his flat was a mess. And I thought, well, my house is a mess. Doesn't make me a killer. And then, and I just talked her through it. And she was like, oh, well, one night stand. And I just said, why are you wasting my time? You're a friend of mine. Why are you wasting my time? And then I friends off Facebook. And she wasn't happy with me. But I was just like, just bloody don't.
And so you were getting all these people calling in with suspects. Obviously, some of them were almost crank calls. But did you ever investigate anyone that had been hurting animals or damaging animals, or did you ever find any hot leads?
Yeah, we've got. I think we've got at the moment we've got a short list of 15, of which we've got a top 3 suspect list, and all 3 have an alleged history of hurting animals and women.
And women?
Yeah.
Wow. So there's a connection there between animals and humans?
I would say so, yeah. Yeah. To be fair, I think, and it was one of the reasons why I was quite cross about the police discarding anybody who didn't have a criminal conviction, because a lot of domestic abuse goes unreported. And usually if there's domestic abuse, there's abuse of the animals as well.
So one thing I want to get, just so people understand the enormity of it and, how gruesome it was, would you be able to list out some of the kind of scenarios that you saw, like cats being decapitated, tails removed, rabbits being injured, and what, replaced on doorsteps? I remember there was a story you told me before about a rabbit being put through a cat door or something like.
Yeah, that was Clive in. That was a replacement of a liver and a collar.
That's it. Could you just go through some of those, just so we get like a portrait of what was going on?
Yeah. So the traditional kind of Croydon Cat Killer scenario is a cat that disappears overnight, last seen sort of 9, 10 o'clock at night going out into the garden, and it's found the next morning, minus head or tail, usually in the garden of where he spent the most time. So if he spent most of his time in the neighbour's garden, it'd be the neighbour's garden. If not, it'd be the owner's garden. And that is kind of your typical scenario. We have had cats that have been missing for longer than overnight, so sometimes up to a week or 2. And the longest a cat had ever been missing was, I think it was 2.5 years. It was a cat in Caterham. But we don't know that he had that cat for 2.5 years, because if a cat goes missing, you don't know what's happened to it. Yeah. It's very difficult to be able to say, okay, yeah, that cat went missing because of him. It could have just been missing and vulnerable because it's missing, and therefore more inclined to, be tempted with food.
But it was returned.
Yeah, but it wasn't returned to its home. It was returned to just outside where a previous victim was. So in Caterham, there were 2 in that road in Tupwood Avenue. But there'd been one a few months previously, and this cat was placed outside that person's house.
Wow.
Which is, again, something we've noticed over time, is that there's some areas he has never, ever killed cats in, and there's some areas he goes back to time and time again. He also goes back on some anniversary dates. So I think some of the killings must have special significance to him because he goes back. But it's not often enough for us to sit and wait for him, because that would just be great, wouldn't it?
So how do you know he's gone back?
Because we've got a log of everything.
Oh, and killed another cat, do you mean?
Yeah, so he's gone back and he's either taken a second cat. There's some families he's gone back and taken second or third cats from. And some places where he's gone back to the same houses, or he's gone around the corner, but he's gone back to that small area on the same dates.
And some families, 3 cats. He's second or third?
Yeah, there was one family that lost 3 cats to this guy.
And were the bodies returned like the other?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, they were all those ones. That family, it was all overnights, so they went missing that night, found the next morning. There's a lady in Caterham who's lost 2 cats to him, and there's been also in Caterham there was a house where a fox cub was found, like 4 years previously, and then that was 2017, 2018. And then in 2022, another fox cub was found almost exactly the same place in the garden with exactly the same injuries.
Wow. And were they decapitations as well?
Yeah, I think it was decapitation, tail removal, and the chest opened.
This is sort of happening all over the south, and you're investigating it with Snarl at this point, and the police are investigating it. And I remember some celebrities, actually, I think Martin Clunes made an announcement saying, which would have driven publicity to it as well.
Yeah, although he was, he didn't really. The problem was, I don't want to criticize people. I'm going to criticize people, but if you're going to publicize something, then get your facts right. And none of the celebrities that kind of talked about it seemed to get the facts right. But never mind.
Okay. But it felt like it was building ahead of steam. And then nothing really happened for a while. And then there was an announcement by the police saying that we've realised through, I don't know, testing forensically or however they do it, that it's foxes. And that was a big announcement. And then there was a huge burst of publicity around what a waste of police time. It was foxes all along. You know, what led up to that? What was the scenario?
They did a case review. So basically, the police have this, I think, a mechanism where if they can't solve something, they bring other people in to do a review of the case. But again, we knew from the first meeting, we only had one meeting with that team ever, and they were completely disinterested. The DI was like, and there was a DC, and she was just like, yeah, whatever. There was no kind of intent, and we knew at that point that at some point we were going to lose the police because they were just. And whenever we had information through, it was like, yeah, right. We had no confidence from that point that they were actually doing anything with the information. It was almost like they'd made up their minds to close it, and then of course they did. Later on, we discovered that. There were issues in terms of, so the forensic pathologist that said it was foxes, she was given bodies by Hertfordshire Police. We subsequently found out that she had no chain of evidence, so she didn't know where the bodies came from. For all we know, Hertfordshire Police did scrape up a whole lot of road traffic victims and send them to her. There was just, and then when the investigative journalist tried to do FOIs to the police, he said, well, that he was told there were no more records, that there were no records of the case at all that had been kept. So it's really shoddy police work. And because of incidents like Clive, we know that it can't be, it can't, that couldn't be foxes.
Yeah, could you talk us through Clive? What happened?
Yeah. So in December, I think it was 2017, there was a lady who ran a rescue down in St Leonard's who was aware of the case, and she had one of our posters outside of her house, and she ran a cat rescue, but she had a house rabbit called Clive, beautiful, beautiful, big lop-eared rabbit, and she had a lovely, absolutely gorgeous kind of Victorian-style garden, a stepped garden, and she went out for their the rescue Christmas dinner, and I think about 4:00. And then came in about 8:00, and Clive wasn't around. And Clive had free reign of the garden with the cats and the kittens. But it was really odd because he was really kind of bonded to her, and to have him not around, she was like, hang on, where is he? So she did a big search of the garden, couldn't find him, was out looking till 2, 3 in the morning, couldn't find any sign of him at all. Went to sleep, woke up at 8 the next morning, walked out of her back door, and Clive was kind of laid out on the first bit of her garden, which was a lawn, minus head, tail, front paws. Horrible, absolutely horrible. So she called police. One of her colleagues called us. Police called us to say we've had one down here because Sussex Police already knew about them. They were excellent. There was a team at Sussex Police who were brilliant. And they went down, and then we went down in the evening. we had to look at the garden, and there were just things looked disturbed. So I rang the police officer, David, who we had his number, and he said, "Look, David, could you get a forensic team down here the next day, because there's bits in the garden that just don't make sense. They don't look like wind." But they'd basically found either the police or she had found the rabbit's liver on a raised stone, which was next to a shed, one of the sheds at the bottom of the garden. So we didn't want to leave that. So her colleague and I lifted up this big ceramic plant pot. It was massive. It took 2 of us to lift and stick it over this raised stone to preserve the evidence. We went back to London. I deeply regret that decision, because the owner was so upset that I felt that we were probably better off if one of us stayed with her. But we had cats to feed and this and that and the other. But I do regret that decision, because he appears to have come back. So the next morning she got up, her rabbit flap was like a dog flap, had been kicked open. It was damaged beyond repair. All of her cats were outside. She didn't know where half of them were. So you can imagine the panic. She called police. Police arrived, and when they lifted up the ceramic plant pot, Clive's liver wasn't there, but his collar was. Now, there's absolutely no way that's going to be foxes. I'm sorry. And I was there. I helped put that plant pot on top of that raised stone. There's absolutely zero way a fox could have gone under there, had the collar in its mouth, deposited it, took the liver and buggered off again. Absolutely no way.
So how are you certain that the person who did that is the same person you were looking for, and it's not sort of a random psychopath over there and then a random psychopath over here?
It's the nature of the injuries. So Clive's body had exactly the same injuries. The limbs and the head and the tail were taken off in exactly the same place as the cat's. Absolutely, some rabbits will get eaten by foxes, especially if their owners don't have appropriate caging for them. Absolutely, categorically. But a number of cases, they've had locks on. So they've had actual locks on the hutches. And I'm sorry, foxes don't run around with spare keys.
Has there been several rabbits that were killed?
Oh yeah. There's been several. In fact, one of the cases in I think it was Luton. I haven't got my list with me, but in Luton, there was a case where a rabbit was killed. Again, a big lop-eared rabbit. And then 6 months later, his head was placed back in the neighbour's garden.
And all these things about, say Clive the rabbit, whose collar was brought back, and when you talk about rabbits having their heads brought back and cats' tails and heads being brought back, you mentioned earlier about a cat being nailed to a door or a tail being nailed to a door or something. Were the police writing this down?
Yeah, well, I would assume so. Certainly, I've got the police report from Clive.
So at that point, they were registering it as something that was
human related. Yeah.
So how did they justify when they came out and said, no, it was foxes? How did they justify the fact they'd initially...
We asked Sussex Police, and they just said, oh, well, Clive's death was unexplained. That's how that... Yeah.
So where does that come from? Where does the lack of desire to fully investigate the cause?
I don't know. I would assume resource. You know, it's a case that involved a number of police forces. There was a police officer in Hertfordshire who we met several times. He was useless, and he was going, oh well, it's wildlife. So, and he was actually, we believe, instrumental in getting Tucker Hay closed down. I can't speak for the police. I don't know what drove their decision. Possibly resource, possibly the fact that the investigation was going nowhere. There's a thought that if all the money that they eventually spent in the investigation, if they'd spent that up front, it may well have solved it, but they didn't do that. And certainly, I know now, once Andy was taken off the case, that very little investigative work got done. So anything that was submitted to the police between kind of February 2018 and September, you can forget. They just didn't look into it.
I suppose there's a sense of embarrassment as well if they've got an open case that isn't being solved. So potentially it was a relief for them to be able to say...
Oh, I'm sure it was, yeah. But again, it's an odd thing, because when the police did close the case, a number of forensic crime officers contacted us, and one particularly in an area where there'd been a number, and he said, I attended several of them, and I can tell you now, as a forensic police officer, I know the difference between bite marks and knife cuts. He said, and we do not understand. But I was just like, well, there's not a lot we can do about it.
One of the things I think is very interesting is in the period that you've been investigating this case, which is almost 10 years, I think there's been 2 or 3 other cat killers caught, haven't there?
Yeah.
Could you talk through some of those people?
Yeah. So towards the end of Takahe, there was a string of incidents in Northampton, and they were the same as ours in terms of there were decapitations and tail removals, but the first ones were not. The first ones were the cats cut up into tiny pieces and placed in carrier bags, like supermarket shopping bags, back on their owners' doorsteps. So that particular guy was a guy called Brendan Geoghegan. He got convicted of arson and also the attacks on the cats, criminal damage. But the judge only gave him 4.5 years. And some of the arsons were absolutely appalling. They were proper arsons to endanger life. And he's disappeared afterwards. We suspect he's gone back to Ireland. We know we can't be responsible for some of the others because he wasn't in the country for the length of time that the investigation was going on. So I think he only came into the UK in 2017, and the killings had been going on for 2 years before. So there was him. Thankfully, Northampton police didn't decide to blame it on foxes because otherwise I'm sure he would have ended up killing someone. I think he took out a number of garden fences, but he also took out a home, a restaurant that was on a boat. Yeah, really quite serious, nasty crimes. And he admitted in court that what he wanted to do actually was break and enter into a woman's home and rape her. So he was quite a dangerous guy. Not someone you really want to meet down a dark alley. And it worried the owners in Northampton when he was released because they were like, well, do you know where he's gone? I said, no, I don't. And they won't tell us. And they said, do we need to be afraid he's going to come back?
And how many cats did he kill?
He was charged, I think, with 8, but there were 13 killed up there. Yeah.
Okay, and let's move on to another one. Because there's a few more, isn't there?
So in March 2019, after the police closed the case, we had a call from lost and found people in Norwich saying, look, we think we've got, and it was lovely. There's a group of ladies who run that group, and they're fantastic, and they go out to any kind of lost cats or found cats or dead cats, and they're one of the few lost and found groups that aren't kind of there's no kind of bitchiness or egos. They just all get on with it, and I really enjoy their company as a result. But they're fantastic, and one of the ladies contacted me and said, look, I've got the back legs and tail of a cat that's been found on an allotment. She said, what do I do? She said, we've never had one of these before. You would think if foxes were doing it, they would have had plenty before, but never mind. So I said, well, look, best thing to do is take it to vet. And she sent me some photos, and I went, I said, I think probably there is a fox's, the cat's been buried and the fox has dug it up. Anyway, she took it to vet, and James the vet went, oh shit. He said, no. He said, no, this is once he cleaned it up, he said, this is way too clean. This is not an animal that's done it. So she came back with that, and I have to admit, I always kind of err on the other side. I'd rather tell owners and people that it's an RTA than that someone's done it. And I couldn't honestly tell from the photos because the body was dirty. And it was like, And then we had another one. And then another one, and then one night a guy was seen trying to stuff cats into canvas bags, and it properly kicked off in Norwich. And that was David Ewu, who went on to kill Martin Decker 2 years later. And in court, he actually said that he wanted to kill as many gay men as possible. So he was just going to kill people until he was caught. And he was only caught because there was a really good police officer in Norwich. So they thought it was David Ewu. They arrested him, but he had nothing on his phone. So he had no photos of the cats, anything. He must have had 2 phones. Anyway, so they had to let him go. But I think they took his DNA and stuck it in the system. So when the DNA flagged up north, a murder scene, they knew who it was, and they went to go and found him. If it hadn't been for the police officer doing that, he probably would have killed several people because they wouldn't know at a starting point as to who he was. And he was then, when they arrested him for Martin Decker's murder, he actually had a phone with all the pictures of the cats he'd mutilated on it. They did put him on trial for the cats, but he used the trial like as a sounding board to try and get at the owners and say, if you want, you know, want to know what I've done with your cat's ears, come and talk to me. I really enjoyed killing your cat. It was all that kind of stuff. And there was no point taking them through a trial, so they just shut it down, which was really difficult for the owners because they never kind of had their day in court and their justice. But better that than them being re-traumatized by his behaviour.
I remember reading a quote from him where he said that he'd enjoyed going on Facebook forums and seeing the owners search for their cats.
Both he and Stephen Bouquet, who I'll talk about in a second.
Well, let's move on to him.
Both of them were neighbourhood groups. Both of them enjoyed the panic and the fear and also the anger and the distress of the owners. And it's one of the reasons when we set the Slane page up that we were not going to be the police's mouthpiece or anybody's mouthpiece. We weren't going to actually post about incidents unless we needed help with something. We're not going to do that at all. Because I think to a certain extent, the police asking us to keep posting about it meant that whoever's doing it was getting a kick out of it, and we just refused to give them that at all.
Do you think somebody could have been on the message boards where you were previously posting, watching that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Well, I am now 100% sure that our guy's watching us. Yeah.
Why do you say 100%?
It was 2018, I think. We started getting we had kind of Croydon Cat Killer cases down in Brighton, and in fact all of the Sussex coast, in most of the towns. So a lot of the animal rescue groups knew us as Snarl. And about 2018, I got a call from a vet to say, we've had a cat brought in. I'm pretty sure they've been stabbed. And I was like, you sure it isn't a road traffic accident? And they went, no, these are knife cuts and they're deep. And the cat actually didn't survive. And I was like, well, that's not something we're investigating. And I said to him, look, please call our SPCA. I said, because if we get involved, we can't take on everything, and it probably is just a one-off. If it isn't a road traffic accident, then it's probably a one-off, but it needs to be reported, so go through the official channels. Well, I was bloody wrong, wasn't I? Was I wrong? Anyway, about a week later, we had another one. Vet called us, said, look, we've got a cat in here and I'm sure it's been stabbed. I was like, oh, I've got déjà vu. So what we did is I actually didn't want to be involved in this because I was worried that people would conflate our case with what was going on. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. When Bouquet was put away, people thought that the Croydon Cat Killer had been put away and started letting their cats out again. But anyway, I digress. One of our team, Julie, kept a log of all the cases, all the potential cases, and was in contact with the owners. I was in contact with some of the owners, and between us, we kind of managed it, although we weren't officially investigating. I spoke to Sussex Police and they were going, oh, it's road traffic accidents. And I was like, no, it's not. And eventually what we did is we made such a noise about it that the police had to start investigating it. One of the owners put up CCTV after their cat was injured. And he actually caught Stephen Bouquet stabbing a cat on that CCTV. And that's how they caught him. It was down to the owners and the lost and found cats in Brighton that Bouquet was caught, not Sussex Police.
And how many cats do you think he was responsible for killing?
I don't know. I suspect he probably killed more than he was. All of the people who've been charged with animal cruelty or criminal damage for killing cats, what their kill numbers and what they're charged with are really big difference. I suspect he probably injured and killed around 30, 40 cats, but I think he was only charged with 15.
It's still a lot, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. It's huge numbers, nasty numbers, yeah.
So during the period you've been investigating what's being called the Croydon Cat Killer, 3 other cat killers have been caught and sentenced.
3.
Yeah. How come your guy hasn't? How is he managing to evade?
There's 2 things, I think. Number 1, we know that he avoids CCTV. Number 2, without an official police investigation in terms of like resource, I think our job is both easier and more difficult. For instance, there was an incident a couple of days ago, and gloves were left at the scene. Now, we can do nothing with those because we do not have the backup of a lab. If police were involved, they would probably have taken those and been able to do something with them. It still needed a big effort from lost and found groups and members of the public. And certainly Boudicca was caught because of members of the public, not because of Sussex Police. But Sussex Police could do all the bits around the investigation to be able to take it to court.
When you talk about the Croydon Cat Killer, you say he. You always say him or he. Why are you sure it's a man?
I'm sure that our main offender is male because serial killers in the main are, and serial killers who mutilate, apart from 2 exceptions, one in the States and one in the UK, both of whom were exceptions in their own right, are men. The 2 female serial killers, one was Eileen Warnos, I think her name was, and she mutilated the faces of her victims, but she had relationships with them, and she was the victim of some of her victims, essentially. So there was kind of a relationship there. The lady who appeared, I can't remember her name, but you often see photos of her in the paper posting with a big knife. She stabbed, I think didn't mutilate her victims. But she, again, was a complete anomaly. So I'd say 99.99% sure that the Croydon Cat Killer is male.
And that's because of statistics, not because you think you know who it is.
Statistics, and also because all the sightings we've had have been male. Where we've had sightings of people feeding cats or trying to lift cats, we have had some females reported, but they've never been the same females. So you know what I mean? Whereas with the Croydon Cat Killer, we have a consistent male. We actually have 2 consistent male descriptions, and not a female one. I wouldn't rule out that he might have help, and that help may be female.
You talked earlier about the rabbit who was killed, and the owner had the picture of your snarl group in the window.
Yeah.
And the way that was described sounded like it was potentially revenge, or showing that if you support
I
this...
think it was.
Right.
Yeah.
But based on that, do you feel at risk or in danger? Because obviously you've very publicly been the face of the person, of the campaign trying to catch him.
I don't scare easily. I mean, I'm quite careful. Unfortunately, I got doxed by some trolls, and they kind of posted my employees' details in public, which wasn't nice of them. And it's not great because one of our employees is disabled. And she would not be able to move very quickly if somebody came looking for me. So as a result of that, we have to have some new work protocols in place where she isn't in the office by herself. So we're sensible about it, but I don't honestly scare easily. There's not a lot that scares me.
Do you think you'll ever catch the killer?
I hope so. We've come close. We've come really, really close. Rob was patrolling, it's a couple of years ago now, but he was patrolling in one road, and the killer literally killed around the corner. And we've had a couple of other instances where we had patrol teams get very close. We're also aware that he is aware of what we're doing. And actually, this last week, we now have a blackout on Twitter. We're not tweeting. So what we do is we've got 6 or 7 patrols. One of our patrol teams is a joint patrol team, so 6 or 7, depending on how you kind of split them out. But they go out. Some of our patrollers go out once a week. Some of them only come out if we're doing something special. A number of them go out regularly. So we've got a patrol presence across South London, I'd say most nights. It's quite unusual for us not to have patrol teams out of one form or another. But we've noticed that in the last couple of weeks, he's been killing on the edges of our patrol areas. And then he's now killed one in our patrol area, knowing, I think, that we were not available. We don't tweet every time we go out on patrol. We tweet once or twice a week. But we do post photos of where we are. And we think he's now using those. So we're just not posting photos on Twitter now for a couple of weeks. But it was quite, we set the patrols up to catch him. When we set up Slane, Rob and I continued to patrol. But we had 2 incidents in Penge, and I got really annoyed about them. And so we decided to actually go public with our patrolling. So we had a couple of Penge meetings saying, look, we want to set up a patrol team. Can we have some volunteers? Come hear what we do. And we set up a Penge patrol team. Actually was talking about this in Norwich yesterday. Let's get the figures right. But I think in the 4 years previously, so from 2016 to 2019, I think there was something like 15 cases in Penge. Nowadays, 0. So from 2019 to 24, we've not had one on the Penge estate where we patrol. We've had them in the outlying Annerley area, but not in Penge. We've got something very similar going on when we set up patrols in Beckenham and in Orpington and across Bromley and across Croydon. So he's definitely aware of what we're doing. And again, if it was foxes, vets would still be calling us saying, can you come have a look at this one? Or we've had one come in, etc. So I don't for 1 minute think he's not watching us now.
So since the police closed down Operation Takahe, how many cats do you think have been killed as a result of this offender or this group of offenders? It's less, I think, because Croydon, Bromley, Penge, Orpington, where most of the cats are being killed. And it still happens in outlying areas, just not very much in that kind of area of South London where we are. So I'd say we probably got 900, and I'm absolutely categorically sure are ours. And about 300 of those, 400 of those are subsequent to the police pulling out. 900?
Yeah. Oh, the unverified are worse. So when we went back and pulled all the data out, I started categorizing them. So if a vet had seen them, if they'd been post-mortemed and absolutely categorically human, confirmed, yeah. If they had been to a vet and a vet had said, oh, I don't like the look of this, it's not a road traffic accident, it's human, and we had been along to have a look and gone, yeah, that's the same injuries. Because sometimes it could be human, doesn't mean it's our guy. So go, yeah, a couple of signatures there, yep, that's confirmed. If a vet says that they think it's human related and there's a match in terms of the description, then we put it under highly suspicious, because I can't get out to every dead cat that gets called into us. If we don't see the body, but it's the same description, again, suspicious. And then if there's less information, it goes down as a possible. So of the, when I say there's about 2,500 incidents reported to us, and about 800, 900 are within the confirmed highly suspicious category.
Awful.
Yeah, it's grim. It really is grim.
You talked there about being doxed previously, and obviously you've had a lot of trolls and you've had a lot of probably online ridicule and people saying, it's a fox, and, how important, obviously the cats, we get that, but how important is it to you personally to be able to say to the world, I told you it was a person?
That's less important to me than him being stopped. Mm-hmm. I've kind of grown a very thick skin over the last 9 years, and it's why I don't really get into arguments online about if people go to say, oh, it's foxes. There was a really silly piece I read on the internet. It was about 3 months ago, about trying to say that I had psychological problems and I was getting a kick out of the owner's distress. And I was just like, all right, mate, if that's your opinion, there's people are going to think either that they're either going to believe something's going on because it's happened to them or something they care about, or they're not. And I said earlier, it's not my job to convince people. It's our job to catch them. If people want to be wrong on the internet, that's not my problem. If they want to be wrong about me, also not my problem. I don't feel the need to be publicly right. What I want to do is stop this, and that's my motivation. I think it comes down to, at the end, it comes down to this, that foxes don't have hammers and nails. They don't have freezers. They can't return bodies 6 months or body parts 6 months later undecomposed. They can't kick dog flaps open. They don't. You might get a fox trying to get into a house via a cat flap, but they wouldn't leave bloody footprints on the cat flap. there's an instance we have where garden furniture has been moved around, and it's been obviously moved against a fence, so someone's got over that. Foxes don't do that. There's just a kind of a whole range of things that aren't fox related.
Wow, amazing. And like the final thing I want to say before we finish is just, is there anything else you want to say? Is there anything you want people to know about this case or about the Croydon?
No, I think the important thing still is understanding, is being called when something occurs. So we concentrate on the investigative aspect of it. So looking at incidents, doing a deep dive on them, etc. We're less inclined to go out to a body. What we ask people to do is take their cat to a vet or found cat to the vet. We do have some volunteers who help us. So if someone is unable to get a cat to the vet, still call us and we'll try and get you help. But it's not essentially what we do. What we do is looking at the data, looking at what happened around the incident. So was anybody noticed, did the owner notice anyone strange? Did they get any phone calls? Did they get this? Because there's been a couple of those as well. There's been some interactions over the years that we think have been him interacting with victim owners. So we ask those kind of questions. So the most important thing I think for people to do is to simply call us. We will always say, please get the cat to your vet. A vet, doesn't matter which vet, and then take the vet's opinion as to whether it's human related or not. We don't make that decision. But even if the vet says, I'm not sure, we probably still will investigate just in case. We'll still ask for CCTV, we'll still get leaflets out, etc.
And my final question, actually, and I think I know the answer to this, but 10 years ago when you first saw that post online, if you'd known that this thing would become such a huge focused part of your life,
I would have run away screaming.
Oh, I didn't know the answer. Would you have?
I would have turned. I would have just walked. I would have walked away from it. Oh, yeah. I think it's cost an awful lot of us an awful lot. And yeah, I would have just gone, no, that's not my baby. That's the RSPCA, please.
Well, look, it's for me been a fascinating conversation. And I do remember all those years ago seeing you posting on those forums. And it's amazing that I've sat down and talked to you about it today and your ongoing search for justice for the cats, but also to find somebody that could, in theory, be committing deeper, darker acts at some point in the future.
I do think that this person isn't just hurting cats, yeah. And I whether he'll spill over into the true kind of traditional serial killer that goes along killing people, I don't know. We don't know whether I've got a theory. My theory, for the record, is that he's using the animals as a control mechanism so he doesn't kill people, but he may already be killing people.